we as a country have moved from being a nation of shopkeepers to a nation of drivers. We've got Amazon drivers on the road. We've got so much logistics going on across the country. So it'd be just really good as a country to see that we're being that progressive, to making sure that all of these drivers from different companies, different categories are striving to deliver the best quality and safety on roads that are really busy.
Welcome to Calling All Stations, the Transport Podcast. I'm Christian Romer, an author and journalist who has covered transport for the past 30 years. In every episode, we try to keep you up to date with the most engaging news stories, policy developments, and interviews in the transport world. And with me is my regular co-presenter, Mark Walker, who has spent decades looking at transport policies and legislation. So, Mark, what are we covering today?
Hello, Christian, and hello to our listeners. Today, we'll be looking in detail at the Integrated Transport Strategy for England, which has just been published by the UK government. We'll also be hearing from a Doughty campaigner for improved safety on Britain's roads. And then at the end of this episode, in your Thought from the Departure Lounge, we'll be giving listeners an insight into your upcoming trip.
Great. Well, so, Mark, I have not yet ploughed through the 92 pages of the Integrated Transport Policy, though I have read many previous attempts at integrated transport policies, stretching back, I think, to the days of John Prescott or whatever. So what's your kind of initial thoughts after kind of reading through it?
Well, I'm pleased to say I've read the 92 pages, so you and perhaps some of our listeners at least don't have to. It does seem to be par for the course, really, that these kind of reports and statements do go on and on when it comes to the verbal content. But as you say, there is a precedent for something like this, and loyal listeners and long-time people who've taken an interest in transport policy will know that
transport geeks. Come on, let's be
okay. That's what we are. Let's own it and be proud. People will know that these kind of things tend to happen when you get a significant change of government and a change of political direction. And back in 1997, when Labour previously came to power, they set about creating an integrated transport policy, which was done in a slightly different order from this time around. So back in 1998, when John Prescott was the Secretary of State for Transport and a number of other things as well, the Department for Transport published the Integrated Transport White Paper, which was done, interestingly, ahead of any major legislation to reform the transport sector. So they'd had a year of consultation, then a white paper. Then you might remember, Christian, there were a series of what were known as daughter documents. So as well as the massive white paper itself, there were then a series of what were known as daughter documents that fleshed out the proposals in various specific sectors and around certain modes. So, for example, there was a bus daughter document that went into much greater detail about proposals for bus reform. And then there was an integrated transport bill, which put all of this into law and became the Transport Act of 2000. So it took another 2 years for the legislation to pass. And then, of course,
did it set up the Integrated Transport Commission, which was
one of the features
by David Begg?
The Commission for Integrated Transport was set up. It also enabled the formalisation of the Strategic Rail Authority, which had been set up as a shadow body previously. But it dealt with a whole variety of other things. It dealt with things like the introduction of certain forms of congestion charging and road user charging. The policy dealt with issues around maritime and aviation as well. So that was sort of order in which things were done back at the end of the last century, as it now is.
I'm afraid it's nearly 30 years ago,
I know,
Mark.
it's extraordinary, isn't it? How time flies. But the issues, so often remain the same. And what we now have, interestingly, is loyal listeners will recall that when Labour came to power in 2024, Transport Secretary Louise Haigh had a slogan which was "Move fast and fix things." And so the Labour government actually had legislation almost straight out of the traps to implement some parts of its transport policy. So the bill to enable the renationalisation of train operating companies was law by November. And in fairly short order afterwards, there was the bus services bill, which has also now become an act of parliament. But just as Louise Haigh was leaving office, so having got all those things underway, just as she was leaving office, she then announced a consultation on an integrated national transport strategy for England. That was in November 2024. And so it's taken until the beginning of April 2026 for that process to be complete and for the policy to be published. Another difference from the previous time, of course, is that the Prescott document was published in the pre-devolution age. So we hadn't had devolution to Scotland and Wales, and we hadn't had the re-establishment of a London-wide authority.
So it's a UK-wide.
It was very much a UK policy.
Right.
And two of the daughter documents that I mentioned were for Scotland and Wales to say this is what we propose to do in Scotland and Wales. Now, of course, Scotland transport is largely a devolved matter. And so Scotland and Wales have their own distinctive transport policies, at least for surface transport. And that's why this document that we've seen published in the last few days is largely confined to England.
Is it a repetition of much of what was in the documents 28 years ago? Or does it move us forward? Is it more progressive, more active, more kind of policy oriented, or is it kind of weaker and less strong?
Well, I want to take a kind of glass half full approach to this, because it must be good to have an integrated national transport strategy for England. It must be good that people have looked at all of the conflicting issues and pressures. But when you come to ploughing through the 92 pages, first of all, what you're given is a strong impression of déjà vu. Because as I've mentioned, the policy comes after some major announcements have already been made and even legislation passed. So you tend to get quite a lot of emphasis on this is what we're already doing in rail. This is what we're already doing with the road investment programme. This is what we're already doing with bus reform. And crucially, this is what we're already doing with further devolution of powers to English city region mayors and also new mayoralties and new combined authorities that are being created under local government reform. So you have to dig a bit deeper to find anything that's new. I mean, there's
what about the word integrated, Mark? You didn't mention the word integrated in any of that. I mean, surely it's not a kind of list of what we should do in each of these areas. There ought to be a kind of
it kind of is. It kind of is at a national level. So the integration, it seems to me, will very much take place at the local level. So through these various existing and new mayoralties and combined authorities, and so there's a very strong emphasis on having these local powers. There are some attempts to have kind of cross-cutting national strategies. So there's a strategy on making ticketing sort of comprehensible and consistent across the entirety of England. There's some ideas around making pricing consistent as well and comprehensible. So, for example, the simplification of train fares, which we knew was already an aspiration with the setting up of Great British Railways. Though, of course, what we have to watch out for is, does simplification of fares mean there are fewer cheaper fares and rail travel becomes more expensive? So the devil may be in the detail there. But it also has strategies. For example, there's a lot on tech and technology and digital, these kind of things to be pursued across the network. But again, in some cases, by giving money and powers to local authorities to access the information to create their own smart ticketing systems for their increasingly locally controlled passenger transport networks.
But do they set any targets, like, for example, on modal share or on, increasing kind of bus use, or, I mean, any of this stuff? I mean, have they got kind of an overall vision of where they want transport to be in, say, 2030 or 2040?
One of the comparisons I've tried to do in looking at this document is to compare with where Labour were in power a bit earlier, which of course was in Wales, where the Llŷber Newydd New Path transport strategy was published as long ago as 2021.
Your Welsh is getting better all the time, Mark.
I'm doing my
Very
best.
impressed.
But there was a clear target there to increase what you might call the sustainable travel share of the market, so public transport, walking and cycling, from 32% as it was then to 45% by 2040.
Wow.
There's no such target in the plan for England that I can see. And it seems to take a much more relaxed attitude to the different modes of transport, even more relaxed than was taken in the 1998 document, which had within it a kind of presumption that more travel by car and lorry would be a bad thing, and we ought to move towards public transport and the movement of freight by more sustainable means. Even canals were mentioned in the 1998 document, whereas this one tends to take the view that we have this transport kind of system and we want to make it all work better. And we don't really mind how people travel. We just want them all to travel better and more efficiently and more cheaply in some cases than they currently do. And it's quite hands off, Christian, in some ways. So interestingly, it segments the kind of communities of England into cities where it kind of says, well, public transport works really, really well here, to then suburbs where it says public transport works quite well, but it could work better. And then to rural areas where it says, well, it's implicit really that people use their cars. And even the suburbs are a kind of, as I've said, a kind of kind of hybrid situation, rather than saying we would really, really like people to use trains and buses and walking and cycling more, and we're going to put the policy levers in place to make that happen. That doesn't really come across, and I think that in a way that reflects the age in which we're living, of the rhetoric that can be used and has been used against the Labour government of being sort of anti-car, war on the motorist. So it seems to me they've kind of filleted this document to make sure that nothing in there can be taken as offensive to car users.
On the other side, could it be seen as positive by environmentalists, and particularly, our friends on the left in the Green Party who are busy eating away at Labour Party votes.
They might do, though, of course, they don't seem very interested in transport and environmental policies these days. They seem to be more interested in positioning themselves to the left of Labour on a whole variety of issues.
Podcast, Mark.
Yeah,
Right?
indeed.
We'll
Indeed.
try and get their transport spokesman on, but
and being glass half full. I don't want to be too negative, because it does make some important connections. So, for example, with transport and health, is a very it's a very pro public and active travel when it talks about health. It makes some strong connections with land use planning and housing, and how transport planning should enable the development of housing, and there should be greater density of housing around public transport hubs, so as to be to attract people and thereby deter car use. But it doesn't kind of explicitly say, I don't think, we want to deter car use. It just says it would be great to have higher density housing around transport hubs. So it's kind of timid in certain respects in its vocabulary.
I understand that there is some endorsement of something we covered recently in our podcast about the idea of a mini Switzerland.
Well, indeed, and that's why, looking on the glass half full side of things, even though what I've said about rural areas was seemed to be kind of quite laid back about the fact that the car will be the dominant mode in rural areas, the government, in one of the rare commitments to actually spend some new money in this document, has pledged £5 million for the mini Switzerland experiment in the Hope Valley of Derbyshire, backed by the East Midlands Mayoral Combined Authority, which we featured in our previous episode, in your interview with Thomas Abelman, who was the author of this plan.
That's
so
pretty quick response. I mean, he must have some good contacts.
Or everybody listens to Calling All Stations and decided that there was absolutely the need to act within action this day from Calling All Stations. But yeah, it is impressive, I think, that argument has been won, at least to the stage of running a pilot.
So apart from the mini Switzerland, are there any other specific commitments about trials, tests, or policies?
Yeah. As I've said, a lot of it is re-announcement, some of it good stuff. So, for example, on investment in passenger Wi-Fi on trains, which is something we've highlighted in this podcast previously. In some of the tech-heavy sections, there's a commitment to Google Maps showing real-time bus information. Though I think that is already the case with Apple Maps, but more people probably use Google Maps, so that's a good thing. There's some quite good stuff on passenger security and safety that aligns with the government's objectives of reducing violence against women and girls. And we've spoken before about the BTP, British Transport Police scheme of dialing 61016, see it, say it, sorted. Well, there's an aspiration to extend that kind of facility much more across the entirety of the public transport network in England. They say that they've already pledged £616 million to walking, wheeling and cycling infrastructure, but there's going to be another paper, a daughter document maybe, which will be the cycling and walking investment strategy, which also, hooray, is going to deal with pavements, a subject dear to my heart as a pedestrian. And
does it mention the active travel policies?
There is quite an extensive reference on active travel generally, and as I've mentioned, the money for it and the health benefits of active travel.
You mentioned a sum of money there. Is there other money mentioned, or is there any new money in there? And Or is it the case that they're really expecting local authorities and mayoral combined authorities to really do this, and they're just setting out kind of overall ideas? And if so, how are they going to make these combined authorities and local authorities do these things?
Well, there's a couple of really good points there, Christian. There's not much in the way of new money, and I have mentioned those sums that are listed, because the paper tends to say, well, we've already pledged money for this and we've pledged money for that in the spending review or in the settlements for the city region mayoralties. When it comes to the compelling authorities to carry out some of these policies, you raise an interesting challenge there, because of course, just at the point that these new combined authorities, with in some cases mayoralties, are being created with all these additional powers and budgets, the Labour Party is at a very low ebb in the opinion polls. So they may well be creating positions that will be filled by elected mayors of other parties who might have a different outlook when it
Or be
comes
totally
to
hostile to
try
all
out their
ideas.
transport priorities. That's right.
Yeah.
And in the spirit of devolution, you're supposed to let them do what they want to do. But then will you see the government trying to impose requirements and standards and obligations onto these mayoralties, so that we don't have a situation where there's a vastly different patchwork of schemes and regimes across England?
Yes, I mean, that's an absolutely crucial point. I mean, that's why I've always been slightly skeptical of devolution, because devolution's fine when the people in charge or devolved authority are kind of in line with your thinking. But we get this in London where, some local councils just won't have cycle lanes, for example, because it's totally against it. So there's no point giving them any money for it, because they won't actually do those sort of things. And this policy does sound like it's a bit open to that sort of blocking mechanism from hostile authorities.
Certainly some creative tension there at the very least. And I think there is as well as some pretty significant omissions from all of this as well. So I've mentioned that this is a policy just for England, and therefore to some extent can't address questions of, say, international travel. But nevertheless, it must be questionable how resilient any policy is when the Chancellor of the Exchequer can pull out of a clear blue sky a commitment to build a third runway at Heathrow Airport,
or a bridge over the Lower Thames,
or a tunnel under the Thames estuary.
Sorry, a tunnel, yes.
Yeah, just how resilient this is in the context of the political pressures under which the government is operating primarily to secure economic growth on its terms, must be something that's open to question. And I do think as well that I mentioned earlier how, in a sense, this paper seems to be quite soft on motoring. And by the way, there is going to be a separate paper on a freight strategy, so it doesn't deal with the conflict between rail freight and road freight, and says nothing about international maritime traffic either. But being soft on essentially petrol and diesel consumption might have been okay a month ago, but with the changing international situation and the price of fossil fuels, I do wonder whether that we could be in a situation where the public are having to clamour for more and cheaper public transport in order to get around in a matter of a few months' time, because they can't afford to fill up their petrol and diesel tanks.
Good point. I mean, do you think there's a bit in there they're worried about the culture wars over local traffic neighborhoods and cycle lanes and whatever, and have kind of retreated in that on that.
I would definitely say so, and that's why I think it's been designed to withstand that any sort of analysis from any of the more belligerent pro-road, pro-motorist organisations, or indeed the Conservatives and Reform. So that there are no hostages to fortune in there when it comes to motoring, and the fact that the policy was announced just before the Easter weekend as well suggests that Labour is not seeing this as a flagship policy either, on which it particularly wants to campaign in the upcoming
a good time to bury slightly boring news.
Well, it does. You can't help but reach that conclusion.
Yes.
that might reasonably be inferred as being the case,
particularly in the midst of a major war going on, and all sorts of other things. So I presume there is not going to be much coverage of this.
There hasn't been so far, because we've had the Easter weekend in between. It's possible it would be picked up when Parliament returns after the Easter recess, but I somehow doubt it. Coming back to your point at the top of our discussion, I think at least for the moment, this is probably one for the geeks, but an important one for the geeks, something for us to, as we've been doing, hopefully in this episode, analyse, review, and see the positives for wherever we can. But it's ultimately, and I think maybe this is my last point, it's ultimately a question of political will with something like this, to make sure that the good things that are in it are seen through and implemented, rather than this become yet another of that litany of reports on transport policy that have been published and then filed away to gather dust on a shelf over the last 50 years or so.
Well, let's hope that our listeners will be promoting this idea, discussing these ideas, and hopefully that's why they come to Calling All Stations.
In previous episodes of Calling All Stations, we've looked at transport safety, and in particular road safety. Christian's been speaking to Louise Liddle, who, following a very personal tragedy, has been campaigning in her own distinctive way for improvements to road safety. And here's Christian's discussion with Louise.
I'm with Louise Liddle, who is campaigning for improved safety after her husband was killed in a road accident. And she was very keen to come on the podcast to press for various changes. So, Louise, welcome to Calling All Stations, and thank you for coming on. Obviously, I feel I have to start with, why you got into this, and what happened to your husband.
Well, thank you for having me on, Christian. I'm really keen to talk about my story as much as possible. Nearly 3 years ago now, I became a widow at the age of 39. And at the time, my husband and myself, we had 2 children who were 6 and 8-year-old. And my husband was traveling home after his football practice one night on his bicycle. And as he approached the junction to turn into our estate, he was hit by a minibus, which was operating in the area, providing bus services, so like a public transport vehicle. And he received first aid at the scene and was taken to Newcastle RVI, where he was in a deep coma. And due to the extent of his head injuries, he died 21 days later. Yes, so that's how I became a widow. I had been with John for nearly 20 years. He and I actually met on a train station.
Oh, right.
And
I can see you're smiling. You're smiling at the thought of him, which is nice.
Thank you. Yes. We very much met on a train station platform one night, and it was a bit of a sliding doors moment. And we shared a 12-minute journey from Newcastle to Durham, and the rest
It's history.
was a wonderful life together with two lovely boys. And John had a wonderful life. He was very active, as you can tell, because he was at football, and he cycled a lot and did the coast to coast several times. He was a very competent cyclist, and he was in full safety gear on the way back, fully reflective, head torches,
So
lights on his bike.
what precisely happened in the accident? How was that caused? And was anybody prosecuted as a result of this?
So no, I guess they were traveling in the same direction, and as he's gone to do a right turn, the bus was overtaking, and that's how
Oh,
the
right.
collision occurred. So I guess this brings me on to kind of what I'm really keen to talk about, which is around post like standards and post-incident sort of policies, really. Is that
So how did they fail you? How did they fail you here?
So, I have to say up front that I think the police and the medics were awesome. The police were so supportive and really good at looking after us and taking us through, because, as you can imagine, like, nobody expects this ever to happen to them.
Of course.
So we didn't know what we didn't know, and they were really good, the police, at taking us through every step and very supportive with all of their things in place. So I guess for me, it's not really around the kind of the police as such, but it took 9 weeks to actually get an interview with the driver post collision, and that was due to the bus company and the bus driver not understanding the full implications of what had happened. And the driver thought that the company should provide legal support to him. The company said, no, you're on your own. And retrospectively, the driver gained union membership, and the union actually came and represented the driver, but wasn't available for several weeks. And, this really concerned me, because 9 weeks is a long time to, create your own narrative of what happened. And I felt really upset about the accuracy within that 9 week period that the police were able to interview the driver.
So how could you change that, though? How could you kind of ensure that kind of thing, terrible delay, didn't happen?
So for me, like, there's a couple of things. I like, the first thing, and I had a meeting with Undersecretary of State Gillian Greenwood earlier this week, who is this Undersecretary of State for Local Transport,
Lillian
and I've
Greenwood.
raised
Lillian Greenwood. Yeah.
and I've raised these points with Lillian, and she's really, keen to explore them further. But for me, there was lots of things going on which just didn't feel right. For instance, the driver called 999, which was great, but actually didn't administer any CPR, and it was actually somebody who then arrived on the scene who did that before the ambulance crew turned up. And there was, as I said, the incident happened very close to my house, and this driver and all of the drivers in the company were very aware of the incident and talked to all of my neighbours. And the little minibus service continued to run past my house every hour, every day, talking to my neighbours who were picking up. And these are people who had known me and John for 10 years. We used to get their papers for them on Saturdays and run little errands for them, because they were slightly older on our street. And this sort of thing really concerned me, because that lack of privacy and ability to grieve was very, very difficult, because our neighbours were saying, oh, this driver says the driver's very upset. But I, at this point, during that, and we were still in this 9 week period, had no idea how the collision had actually occurred. There was no kind of detail given to me by the police as per their procedure.
Did you
because they
not have a
hadn't fully
police liaison or something like
I
that?
did, yes. He was very supportive, and following every procedure they had the ability to follow. But because of this delay in the interview, they couldn't really, tell us with any sort of accuracy what actually happened. And at the same time, my privacy felt severely breached. And felt intimidated in my own house because this bus is driving past my house every hour. So much so that I felt it was untenable for me to live there anymore. Not only did I have my husband's collision happen at the junction that I had to go in and out of every day to take the boys to school, but this hourly reminder of this bus coming past that might have been the one that killed him.
Right.
And so that really struck me that actually there's something around driver training and standards within bus companies post incident, because it was a severe breach of what I felt my personal from a GDPR perspective and my ability to be able to have privacy.
So how did Lillian kind of so what were the key points you were putting to Lillian then?
So things I said to Lillian about were, I'm conscious that there's 35 hours of CPD every 5 years for drivers. There's no prescription on what that CPD is.
Of CPD.
And
sorry, what's CPD?
Yeah, continual professional development of drivers.
Right.
And if there's no prescription of what it is, or even some bits mandated, what's to say a driver can't just do the same thing every 5 years and then they're not actually continually progressing in their development as a driver? So that was something that I discussed with her at length around, how can we ensure that the driver is a safe driver, that there's safer policies in each bus company as a result, and drivers know where they stand, because from the driver's perspective, he didn't go to work to kill somebody. He needed support as well, and he needed support from his company to do so.
Right.
So I felt, so I said to Lillian, actually, this is something really important, because if you're contracting out a service at a local level, and you should know that by these people who have got the contracts, these companies that have got contracts, it's an extension of public service, and therefore it should be consistent. So what one bus company provides, another bus company should provide, so that you can drive quality in the public service vehicles that are on the road, and make sure that whatever's happening in Durham is happening in Devon, and that there's a level of consistency across it from whoever you're contracting out services to. So the second sort of point that I raised and would like to see change in is around, how, that's drivers and the companies around the CPD element, but how do we look as government devolve more responsibilities to regions? How do we look to put in some sort of quality framework where when you're contracting out services? So this could be one element of it, the CPD and driving, but how do we ensure that it's not just looking for value for money and the cheapest, but how do you get how do we make sure that every public service vehicle that's on the road that's been contracted to deliver a service in a region is operating to the same high standards that we all, as people who would use public transport, deserve to have?
Right.
So that's something that I've suggested to her, that there's some sort of quality framework and to drive that consistency as powers are devolved, so that as citizens within the country, it doesn't matter if there's something that happens to me in Manchester or something that happens to me in Norfolk. I will have the same level of service and protection, really,
right.
when I choose to use
over
public
what sort
transport.
of issue? Over their safety standards and over their professional training and stuff.
Yeah, so I think that's what the CPD and the way that the companies operate should all operate to same high level. So I know for a fact, because I've got a friend who works in another larger bus company, that there would have been occupational health in place, and the driver would not have been allowed back on the road until a certain period, and certain sort of conversations had happened. And with that in mind, how transient drivers can be, and move, not just from bus company to bus company, but up and down categories once they've got a large, once they've got the their license to drive large vehicles, that actually there should be some sort of national driver's record. So I work in education, Christian, and we have a lot around safer recruitment in education in the wake of, terrible things that have happened where, schools used to do DBS check, a DBS check would come back clear, and that's fine to employ them. Whereas now there's a lot more around recruitment of drivers, recruitment of teachers or recruitment of any staff that work in education. And I feel we should be looking as an industry, or the transport industry, at how do we ensure that no matter where a driver goes, any bus company or taxi firm can look and see that actually, oh, this driver's been involved in a collision. Because
do you not have that as on your driving license? I suppose you don't. If you
not unless you're criminally prosecuted.
Yes, right.
So,
right.
and to me, we've got very safe vehicles on the road now. We've got the automatic braking. We've got so much technology on transport vehicles now, and they really are up in their game from that perspective. So actually, a driver becomes the single biggest variable in safety.
So you want some sort of national register or something, or a national kind of like a child safety check,
Yes, just to know, like so when they're doing recruitment of drivers, there's an ability to check and challenge to say, oh, there was an incident here, and then the driver can explain themselves. Well, my tire blew out. It could be something as safe, as simple as that, but it should be recorded so that we can spot patterns, and companies can feel reassured about a driver joining their company, and this should sit alongside their CPD. So yeah, so that they're the sorts of things that have kind of I'd noticed as a family when we're thinking, this is not right. This feels like there needs to be more rigor here. And as I said earlier, it has to be an extension of public duty when we're contracting services to an external company, that they should be seeing.
Have you talked to other victims of road accidents or fellow campaigners about this?
Yes, I've talked to some. So I've been involved with Break, who are the National Road Safety Charity. So I've wrote a piece for them around this. So Break have been very involved and supportive of what I've been trying to say. And I've been like, I think everybody's got a different perspective on it. So mine's around, I very much have focused on the driver and that safer recruitment piece and that better training. But there's other people can see things from other sides, and I think all of this could contribute to a more robust quality framework, and there could be some consultation around it about what that quality framework could look like as a whole as we devolve powers to regions to contract out services.
So you're particularly concerned with professional, basically bus drivers, or are you concerned with other drivers as well?
I think this is what I was saying about drivers being very transient. We as a country have moved from being a nation of shopkeepers to a nation of drivers. We've got Amazon drivers on the road, day in, day out, hour in, hour out. We've got so much logistics going on across the country, and I know that big sort of logistics companies have it's not mandatory, but it's like a voluntary code of conduct that they can sign up to. And feel like actually if they're volunteering to sign that up, some of the logistics companies, surely there's some want in the industry to show that they are delivering and working to really high quality standards. So it'd be just really good as a country to see that we're being that progressive to making sure that all of these drivers from different companies, different categories are striving to deliver the best quality and safety on roads that are really busy because of the nature of how our country's changed, as I said, from being
okay. So as a last point, then, what's the next steps in this? Is Lillian coming back to you on stuff, or what's happening next?
I think she was really pleased to hear my observations and what I said. So she is exploring what that might look like, and she's picking it up with colleagues across other departments as well, because there's crossover in some of the things I'm saying, because obviously I'm interested in, how do we ensure quality as we devolve money and responsibility to regions. but there's other aspects to look at nationally. So she's taken that up with colleagues across departments in the Department for Transport, and it's going to come back to us. And I'm very much supported by the MP in my local area, Joe Morris, about what I'm doing. So it's great to hear. It's great to see that people are listening to me at the right level about what I'm observing. And I think there's more that others could contribute, like you say, from their experiences of road incidences as well.
Okay, well, Louise, that's absolutely fascinating. Obviously, I'm terribly sorry that this is triggered by a terrible tragedy, but I wish you all the best in your endeavours, and I think you're making a very important point. So thank you for coming on Calling All Stations.
Thank you.
Here's Kristian's final thought from the Departure Lounge.
Well, good listeners, I'm about to be in the Departure Lounge because I'm about to go off on Kenya Airways to Cape Town via Nairobi, and that's for my next book, which covers the Cape to Cairo project, which was a scheme dreamt up by Cecil Rhodes, who had the idea of basically enabling people to travel by rail. Actually, there were going to be a couple of ferries involved, but basically by rail from the tip of Africa to the top of Africa. And for my next book, to be published by Penguin sometime in 2027, I'm going to travel as much of the area as I can. And my first trip, I'm doing 2 trips actually. My first trip will take me overland from Cape Town to Dar es Salaam via Zimbabwe and Zambia, as well as South Africa. And I'm going to be there for the next 3.5, 4 weeks. And I'll certainly be providing podcast listeners with some down-to-earth coverage of the railways and other transport systems in southern Africa. So look forward to that. It's going to be amazingly exciting. I hope I get through safely. There's quite a lot of hazards ahead, and I will be telling you about the amazing railway that I've discovered runs on part of the Zimbabwe system. So watch out for that.
Thank you for listening to Calling All Stations, the transport podcast with Kristian Warmar, which is produced by Cogitamus Limited, a leading provider of public affairs consultancy services in the sector. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please do consider giving us a 5-star rating with whichever platform you use. Do follow us on social media. You can find Cogitamus Limited, Calling All Stations podcast, Kristian Warmar and Mark Walker across a variety of platforms, including LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky and X.